Revit is like this incredible BIM powerhouse that's evolved from the world of CAD and us using computers to design our projects. So I would start off for bringing Revit into a residential firm by starting with an informed workflow. Hello and welcome to Architecture Beyond. I'm your host, Brandon Aaron Gibbs, founder of the course platform I Am Studio and director of Studio Motion Forum. Architecture Beyond is an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their design and creativity gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. This is our first series of episodes, so I hope you enjoy our guests and stories. Be sure to listen to the end for your opportunity of connecting with Architecture Beyond. Hello and welcome to the Architecture Beyond podcast, a show exploring the boundaries of the world of architecture and the surprising opportunities in the spaces between. I'm your host, Brandon Aaron Gibbs, licensed architect, AIA member, and storyteller. Today's show is talking about the boundary and the applications of Revit for residential design. Whether you're a residential designer or an architect who does multiple disciplinary works, Revit is going to be a very powerful opportunity and option. However, you have to really ask the question yourself, is it the tool for you? And so that's what we're going to explore today, and explore how it can actually be an incredible part to your workflow as an architect. Before we start the show, I want to talk about the sponsor today. I Am the Studio. Of course, that's my course platform site where I go over topics and courses in Revit and doing things like making details. Also, there are courses in parametric design, courses in Dynamo that you can get involved and learn some of those basics that will make you the best at Revit. So let's get started talking about residential design. What is residential design? Residential design is about the experience that is being created for a homeowner or a set of homeowners that you are putting together as an architect, learning the stories that characterize their day-to-day lives, understanding how you can use shelter to create that and to form that, and working along with your design team, along with consultants, to get that to the building process where they have a built environment that really satisfies their need of shelter to a special extent. So that's what residential design is. Of course, there's multi-residential and single residential. The idea is you're designing a home and it's really a core part of architecture. However, let's look at what happened when we were talking about what Revit is. Revit is like this incredible BIM powerhouse that's evolved from the world of CAD and us using computers to design our projects to actually working in a system that's all about the information in the system. So as opposed to just lines being drawn on a computer, you're actually putting together systems and operations as you're building it, where there's a 3D model at the center that can be related and cross-linked parametrically across the project. So that's something that would describe Revit in a very simplistic way. However, what do people really experience when you're doing Revit? You're designing towers, designing large buildings, and going through things that make Revit very efficient, very fast. Whereas from my experience in designing dozens of homes, we loved sketches. We loved making models. I did a lot of 3D prints. And so there's a lot of crafting bit by bit. Whereas Revit is like this massive amount of details, amount of cross-link that is, of course, great for schools, universities, hospitals that I've done. However, what about for the scale of a home and a few small spaces that have to be intimately connected with very intricate detail? Well, I believe that Revit is a great opportunity and it's a great thing that could be used. And so we're going to go into that and find out ways where both of these can work together. First, I do want to talk about some of the things that make Revit actually a really, really good tool to be using. I have to say that I wasn't thinking of Revit myself in this way when I first started, of saying, okay, it's efficiency, because of course I like everyone else was like, okay, I want to do something crazy. Okay, this is a little bit hard. Let me just bring something in there. Another great tools like Rhino Inside that are great for Revit. However, that's not the only thing that Revit can do, is just take stuff from other programs. There's a lot of great things inside of it. So let's go ahead and talk about some of those key features that are already in Revit that make Revit incredible. In terms of time savings, there's a survey by McGraw-Hill Construction that talks about the 50% of AEC firms that are using BIM that's saving over 25% of savings. That means it's going to be saving time and money. There's a project lifecycle efficiency that's part of Revit as well, because of the BIM platform that allows the project lifecycle management going from the beginning to the end of the process, that have helps you work on significant cost savings. Of course, according to other studies, it can save up to 40% unbudgeted changes. That means that when you're changing something, it's so much easier. There's also better collaboration. Autodesk is stating, according to 360, that it can result in 50% fewer coordination issues due to its enhanced collaboration features. And now in terms of cost savings, 40% of the surveyed BIM users by McGraw-Hill Construction reported that BIM helped them decrease project costs by over 5%. And then in the world of error reduction, there's a case that Autodesk has that suggests that transitioning to BIM with Revit reduced errors and emissions by up to 60%. And in terms of quality control, the use of BIM software like Revit can improve quality in the construction documents by 63%, according also to McGraw-Hill. And I want to definitely thank those sources for great insights into what Revit has to offer. So let's break down first another topic of what residential design is before we delve into that strategy. And then we're going to go into a lot more about what Revit is. And then we'll go into some methods to do and get the most out of Revit and residential designs. Here's a brief history of residential design, pretty much as an idea. I've been very much influenced by architects like Frank Lloyd Wright. Their sketches like those by Le Corbusier, these are some high influences to me, though of course I have some influences in my neck of the woods where I was from Tennessee, or even in my travels around the world. Just really, I've seen homes in different parts of the world. So those do all impact me individually, but if we talk about the industry, we're talking about what pretty much is the core of making architecture. It's making a shelter for where we can live. And so each culture has a different take on it, but pretty much the end result should be the same. People should feel like home. They should like their level of society. Nowadays, after living in a place like Africa, or living in like camping, or living in China, these other places, like I see that there are different expectations, in terms of weather, in terms of how much technology people want in their spaces. So there's a big way that nowadays there's levels that are very different. However, people still want that sense of home. And so the idea is, if someone comes to you with an idea for a home, wherever you are in the world, you're going to be looking at how to satisfy this demand and look at what's locally available. And you're going to use your architect's tools of coming up with the sketches, coming up with models, coming up with that idea for the home. And that's going to be where we're going to look at what will connect to something like Revit. There are the hand tools that you're going to be using as you're starting. You're going to be thinking about just getting the idea together. I mean, whether you use bubble diagrams or just keeping your great notes, because we all know as architects that listening is going to be something that's very critical. And then we're going to have that period where we break into saying how to meet these needs in an architectural project with drawings. And so that is where we definitely can get into our CAD systems. However, of course, I know that from my designing lots of homes, in the Gulf Coast, around that region, one of the processes was taking and making sure that we're connecting the knowledges that we had and from that client conversation with ideas about, okay, this is the size we want, this is a material selection, this is how we can do this. So I can make a very much orthogonal set of boxes for saying how these things fit together. And so I did that in CAD. I thought that was very easy. However, I know that I was immediately coming out back into hand drawing because I was saying how each of the details work together. Plan was definitely that generator, just like Le Corbusier talks about in terms of architectural form really being defined pretty much in stages, like a plan being developed. Then this elevation could be driving this 3D experience and ideas. That's a great way to step into it versus just taking clay and molding it. Residential having that very much meeting a need versus just a formal expression was really important for me, and that's a process I learned in residential design. And I think that's been very much a part of a lot of different residential designers. We're solving problems because we are really trying to connect our ideas. We're not just thinking about like maybe sculptures as much because we know that it can be more functional. However, when I talk about custom residential and custom high-end design, we're definitely wanting to push material, push space, but the idea is we are working on those needs. And so as we're building this idea of a building, we're going through sketches, we're going through programs like CAD. And it's like as if the CAD is like the last step in the process, the minimal step, because as we doing like very large, spending days on rendering by hand, we will get that 3D model out. It might have been done in something like a SketchUp or something, and we'll be detailing it all by hand. And the thing is, this has been a very common workflow because architects, we love to draw with our hand, we love to be working on that. And so when we are sort of forced to see new software out there, which is typically toward the end part of the process, we're saying, what is the cost benefit of going out there? And the way we're designing homes, the way we're looking at client needs, the way we're bringing in systems, and then having this stage into going from the schematic design, which is the beginning of the process, into that design development, we're looking at putting in details, being more specific. And something like a CAD is a simple way of just us sort of organizing it and thinking about budget. That's where we go into saying, hey, look, let's do, for a lot of residential, we're trying to do a base set to get to construction documents. We're not doing the work that maybe in a custom commercial design is occupied, where we're doing an entire set of schedules for every single material, every single step. One of the great things about working in residential is you're working with contractors who have that experience and know how to do with that detail. Like, they know how to work with brick, they know how to work with concrete, they know how to bring in that wood, those fine elements, and bring those into design. So we're not like guessing. So by having that connection already with the contractor, that made the residential designs that I worked on, a lot of architects having your builder, that makes the process so much more streamlined, so that you don't actually have to build out that entire library of details that a commercial firm often will need. And it's useful to have those. However, in terms of having that understanding, I understand that that's one of the ways that we save on margin as residential designers and residential architects. Now, looking at Revit in terms of that perspective of seeing, okay, from beginning to end, this very hands-on residential project, how does that connect with something like a Revit? Let's first talk about Revit itself. It's one of the best AEC tools because it uses building information modeling. That's where it's breaking down the project, all the architectural things, the 3D things, into information, and it connects the information. Information doesn't leave the process. So it's like as if you're actually making a model and you're using that model to be directly generating. It sort of goes back to that idea of what we would do with architectural model and school. I've experienced this where that model is what we're drawing, what we're dissecting and understanding. With the information model, you still have that central model, and you're being able to draw drawings, you're being able to draw all sorts of information. You can use takeoffs to see exactly how many windows, how many doors, how much material is being used. And the parametric nature of it means it's all connected back. Whereas something like a CAD, which mimics the actual architectural process with hand drawing of having, okay, this is a section. Well, the section, if something changes, I have to go back and bring out my Mylar or bring out my Valium and redraw it. There's something that has changed. And so the difference with something like a BIM or CAD is that if I change anything in the model, all the drawings that are related to that are going to change. Even to the point of, if I need to work in phases where things need to change and I need to see the difference, that's actually also built into a BIM system as well. So that's going to be this crucial thing that BIM is setting itself apart, where it's not disconnected. It's parametrically connected. It's connected at all points. There's that 3D modeling aspect that Revit has, that Revit is a built-in 3D engine where it's knowing where every point is, it's knowing where every surface is, and there's that connection. So it's that model, and those are all connected with a set of data. If it's a type of wall, it's a type of roof, it's knowing what it is, And that's going to be something that is incredibly useful because it's not just me making a dumb model, it's a model that has each element as its own agency. The multidisciplinary coordination is another great part of Revit, where Revit is made to automatically connect with engineers. It's made to connect even with contractors who all have their own part of the program that sort of focuses on their needs. I just have been working on some electrical plans with Revit, and it's also very easily built in. Like anything you bring in, you're actually bringing in something that could be directly from the manufacturer, whether it's lights, whether it's a paneling system, whether it's electrical, these are all actually could be directly connected. I've worked with furniture consultants as well, and the idea is we can get those straight from the consultant. We don't have to just create everything from scratch, though we love hand drawing as architects. Something about Revit being able to find the exact thing is a way we can greatly simulate, including going down to the point of if we're rendering it and we're showing it, we can of course render anything that we've done in Revit. Part of that, of course, does go into the skill of learning how to work with materials and learning how to set those. However, because of that BIM model, again, it's not just that you are setting the material for one object. You're setting a material not just for one layer, but you are setting the material for a family. So like a wall having a family means it's controlled all across the different parts of those families in the model. So I'm setting up a roof system and I'm saying all my shingle roofs need to be a particular type. I can be setting that up. And so that system of control and coordination is helping a real beautiful set to a lot of different stakeholders within the design process. Now, construction documentation is just another, of course, great product of working with Revit. It's another product in the flow of working with Revit, because it's immediately with that 3D model, I'm just doing a cut right through it and I can see what's happening. Now, in that section cut, there's an option of seeing it at a different detail level. There's also a way of something that Revit does of having detail and model lines. That's where you get to really detail out how something actually works together. And both there, you also can have just 2D drawings that you have actually imported from either manufacturers or your own system libraries. So you can get to specifically what's happening within an element. And this construction document, of course, is going to be really crucial, obviously, from getting to the process of working and getting like bidding and understanding how something's going to be working on, to understanding how, when you're getting your submittals, maybe from an engineer or a manufacturer, a fabricator, you're saying, does it really work? So you could take something like those drawings and put them and compare them back to that model that you have. So there's not a big gap between your construction, maybe just looking at something, where you actually can get their shop drawings and you can put that with your model. You can do that, of course, in CAD, but the brilliant thing of when it's 3D is you can have such a larger version. This includes coordination among systems, where you can actually bring in your engineer's models, you can bring in your mechanical model and see it all at once. So, and a lot of this is going to definitely be going over the head of a lot of people who are maybe doing more simple residential design, where you're using simple systems that you don't need to get this comprehensive. However, stick with me. We're going over how Revit is going to actually be able to both do well in that big scale and small scale. So let's talk about like that final corporation part in Revit that makes it really what it is. Revit also has some advanced interoperability, which means how it works with other different programs. And so, of course, that's something that's a lot of people really interested in. How do you get things back and forth? That includes format, which I don't know if you've heard of, like a lot of people think that Revit needs something else to go before it. Revit actually, with Autodesk, has created a great suite of tools, including 3ds Max, which is actually a part of the AEC collection, but also Format's a part. And Format is where you can actually be making small changes and checking out options from your model, and you can actually lively integrate it. So Format is not exactly like SketchUp, but it has sort of that same nature for creating forms and not having to think too much about some of the BIM stuff. And so that's also, of course, incredibly important, because you want to be working on custom details and understanding how to work with those. So there's also the interoperability of working with other programs, just in terms of CAD programs like Rhino. There's Rhino on Side, which I have a course on, and I think that's a really great addition as you're working to understand. Maybe if you want to use a lot of plugins, maybe for analysis, environmental design, you could be doing that. Or if it's even based off looking at maybe like a physics simulator, working on different systems, if you're trying to figure out different formal connections, different structure systems, those all can be integrated with Revit. So Revit is actually that ability to build on and add to your projects is going to be another great thing about it. Energy analysis is also something. Insight is one of the plugins. There's also several other plugins. Something like Ladybug Tools has made some great plugins as well that can integrate and let you start to also think about the sustainability element in the architecture in Revit. And so it's not like an after the fact. It can actually be going into each of those building systems and giving you a composite and accurate energy description, and you could be forming your energy strategies from there, including knowing about sunlight and what's happening with windows and glass. All of this is part of it. Another more advanced part of Revit is its cloud-based collaboration. So I loved it from my first time working on a project with several people in a Revit model, where each of us had the ownership of a particular element, and so we all could seamlessly be working on the same 3D model, and each of us, of course, had organized. However, the model had this self-awareness to help us be working on one part at a time, so we're not overlapping. So that's really critical, and the 360 also lets you do it across several different locations. Maybe the engineers can be working on one part and architects on another part. So that's another just critical thing. Design automation is something that's going to be more advanced with Dynamo, and I've taught courses on Dynamo, and I think it's really great because you can start to say, let's take something from our Revit model and let's start to work on a system. It could be entirely generative to just sort of analytical, going into your model and bringing it, understanding something out. So those are some things that you have with your Revit. I could, of course, go into some of the detailing and revision, but again, that's just, again, it just shows you more of the Revit full software suite that you actually might see some other programs start to connect with. Maybe someone has an Excel tracker for some of these details and project stages, but Revit also has that inbuilt. And it also has, again, just a lot of great CAD parts to it. Like your ability to have a great material library connecting with a lot of different inputs. And the Revit model is very much embedded, so you're actually not having to go back and forth to a lot of different sides. But Revit loads very quickly as long as you have a computer that can really handle that. So those are the features of Revit, some of the simple and advanced parts that make it really great for architecture and AEC projects. And it seems maybe bulky to some people, but it actually is really, really useful as you learn it. If you go into Revit and just have a simple thing to do, there's actually an easy way to do simple projects. However, it does have more advanced elements as you wish to learn to work with. And so that's some of the things that make Revit really interesting, that it doesn't just look like it's super bulky. On the alternative to looking at a program like CAD, there is a little bit of a bigger learning gap. However, the fact is you could really much figure out a small workflow for getting a particular level of architecture done very simply. So you could step your foot in. If you have like a firm that you're thinking about Revit, you can have a few people just learning how to incorporate it. And that's going to be part of the thing that I go over when I talk about what it means to employ Revit.
You're listening to Architecture Beyond, an exciting new podcast about life after architecture and the stories of those taking their gifts to impact the world beyond the studio. This podcast is produced by I Am the Studio, a premium resource for training architecture and design professionals in the top industry software. If you need help with learning design software and techniques to a professional level, please follow the link on our page.
And so I want to talk about how we can turn around now, as I've talked about residential design a little bit, how we do it, what the process is like. I've talked about Revit, all of its features and benefits, how it's really great for architecture to a scale. Now let's talk about how we find that unlikely marriage of tradition and BIM together. So the challenges of custom residential is something that we can start off with because we're talking about custom spaces, custom material connections. Pretty much, as opposed to just saying we're going to just do a stick frame house and particular type of window, particular type of furniture. Sometimes with custom residential, we want to do something unique and interesting, both with structure, both with how the spaces are working. We're not just using the typical design elements. So what we like to do in that wise, maybe in a program like CAD, is that we're definitely just always breaking some of the rules. Having something like our sketches is a great part of that. But when we get to the point where we're wanting to do more hardline drawings, definitely just sort of maybe duplicating sometimes our models is the way to be getting and showing those different stages. However, that's the question that you say when you go to a program like Revit, what does that mean? So I would start off from the get-go for the challenge of bringing Revit into a residential firm or a firm that wants to do residential projects with Revit by starting with an informed workflow. That workflow is going to start off by saying that we are going to pre-project think about how we're going to bring in such a system as Revit. I believe that you will need to be honing a schematic bubble where you're saying, okay, this is how the project is going to start. This is how the project is going to develop. This is how the project is going to finish. And that can be listed, and just like in the design processes where you're thinking about schematic design, design development, construction documents, construction administration, if those are listed out, you could be saying immediately what we need to do with Revit is going to be putting together our project in our system before we ever get into Revit. And so that will include templates, that will include working and creating different styles, families, assets, and documentations. There's a lot of places you can download. I have some in my courses where you can be getting a set of bases for working with Revit projects. You don't need to be starting from scratch every project. In fact, that's be the worst way. Obviously, that's might be why people are drawn off by it, because it's actually, there's a bit of pre-work needed. I would say that it's good to try a project, and one of the firms I was at, we just tried a project in Revit, and the idea is you sort of start to see the pitfalls, the challenges, getting what you want. However, the idea is it's good to have that project as well as coming in with templates and seeing what is your preference. You will have that understanding with the entire Revit framework, all the parts of the project. And this also can include working with consultants, understanding, okay, now if my consultant is going to use Revit, it's going to be great for how that would interop, because they're going to bring in other Revit files that I'll learn on linking those. However, if they're not, there's also a good workflow when working with something like a CAD import or a PDF import. Next, we're going to be talking about the balance between Sketches, Photoshop, and Revit schematic drawings, because that's going to be something that's important. Because the idea is at the end of your template and how you're going to work with Revit, you've got to think about how you're going to integrate it into that design process. If you're talking with a client, coming with initial ideas. And so what that's going to look like is the first part of the process, you're saying you're bringing things into Revit. And that could be just having your sketch and having your Revit geometry. I like to use detailed components. That's one way. But again, I also described working both with masses within Revit, where you can be massing out the architecture, all of which can be immediately pretty much painted with architectural elements very simply. And the idea is you don't lose the initial mass, the sketch masses. You can have several different sketch masses within your model. And you also, with programs like Format, which are a plugin directly into Revit, including after Revit 22, it's more connected with Revit. You could be going over different scenarios. You could get it very detailed even within Format and have that into your Revit model and have that live linking going back and forth. Finally, as we have this process both in your file structure of having your things that you're going to bring into your Revit project as you're schematically developing in the design, you pretty much are just going to look at your outputs. And so Revit exports high quality JPEGs. You can connect with programs like V-Ray or other renderers that, just like Inkscape, where you can either just render an image, and you actually don't have to do a lot of work to get a beautiful image. Even in Revit, it does like some basic styles for exporting, but you also, of course, you just have that incredible ability with a renderer of getting like this high quality render with lighting and materials. It does add another step. However, it is pretty fast. If you have the expertise, and I have of course courses in that type of material, and so the idea is if you know that, you're going to actually be taking your Revit in a greater direction. And so when you're using those sets, it's going to make it a lot easier to be getting into Revit. You're not going to be just jumping into Revit and trying to force it to do what CAD does or Rhino does. You'll be working with templates, working with predefined styles, and just having your pre-processes. And when you're immediately saying that's the type we're going to use for this Revit project, you're not going to have a problem both changing, coming with design, and working within the Revit environment. It's that simple. It's not something that that is tending to rushing if you haven't first did it, but when you have done it, it's going to make that first part go very fast, including if you're coming up with creative ideas for different materials, because like I said, with forming and with masses or custom masses, you can actually make very custom things that you are going to use in your space. And it can be very much about seeing the mass, seeing how things relate. You don't have to rush into using BIM-centric walls, floors, etc. And that really is part of the ways that a lot of residential design is going to really benefit in that first part of the process. Because of course we can start using a bunch of pre-built elements that are going to make it so much faster. Of course, in terms of things like windows or using furniture, etc. But being able to get that form finding process started, including if we wanted to print it out and sketch over it, it's going to be very fast from that point. The next thing we're going to talk about is the schematic part of a process. So I say the schematic bubble. This is when you're actually in the Revit project. So this is when you're saying, okay, so we're working a template. How do we make sure we're building this project right? And as a residential project where we're not trying to spend a lot of time going into maybe a large coordination effort, when we might just be working with an engineer and a contractor that uses some standard materials. Well, we're going to begin with parameters like site location, general design site, size, size, materials, how we're going to build this material for the building, and simplifying those very early on, which is also a great way to make sure we're already knowing the code for building in terms of license architecture, having to work with codes. That's going to really help in the beginning as we're bringing that schematic project down, because we'll already have a context for how large are walls, how things are relating. The materials, it's going to help as a lead-in beyond the just formal conversation. And so understanding and starting your Revit project with that set of information very clear, it's going to be really critical. And the idea is you bring that into a Revit project, just like you would think about if you're sketching. You're sketching over a site plan and you're saying, okay, I know I need to have things in this way, this orientation. It's going to work really well. And understanding how to do that in Revit is going to be critical because you're starting the project, connecting everything. Next, you're going to follow up with a great folder structure, because you're bringing in, of course, just like your project folders, you're going to have project elements for Revit, including like support materials, different. If you're looking for a family for a material or a system, you can be bringing that into your Revit support folder. Also your sketches, as you're going with your sketches and figuring out how you're going to bring those into Revit, you'll be placing those there. I was speaking about how you're going to be working with masses or programs like Format. The great thing about those is, of course, you can just have your folder if you're going to put sketches there. So that's going to be one way you can be putting some design options, or you can just save them in the file and pretty much maybe take them out later if you have selected one option. So that's a great thing that you can be doing immediately. You also can be working on exporting those those pretty much initial sets where you're finding out, okay, this is where I'm playing with the plan, coming on with that. Just having that set of sheets for where you're going to show your schematic design sheet set. That's going to be, of course, pretty critical as well, using a template for your drawing export. If it's going to be 11 by 17 or 24 by 36, however you're going to do it, you're going to have that ability to just always be exporting that. And that's going to make that schematic design work so much well. The form finding in places like Formit and working in things like the masses are really free, and I think it's like you just need to spend some time with it in Revit a little bit. However, I think it's worth it because in terms of always going back and forth between SketchUp and AutoCAD is a great sort of control. However, I do love the ability for that to be integrated directly within Revit in terms of Formit or using masses, that you're always in Revit and you're always seeing things without having to transfer and do too much converting. I think that's going to help the process and avoid too much loss going between programs. That's a major issue in the design process. Also, as many designers prefer to have freedom crafting the forms in that time, I think you could be making sketches of some things that would be final forms, and you could be saving those in your support folder. Maybe you can have sketch versions if you're thinking about maybe some custom wood forms or custom brackets, something like that. I've used a lot of those. You could be putting those already, or even your custom doors, you could be already designing those and getting those ready for the project, and you could be refining those as you go. Next, you definitely will be already getting that render styles. That again, if you had started with the render styles, if you for a project might customize it a little bit, you'd be putting those in and being ready to go through them, so you can see the project in a normal way. And I think connecting with a program like Photoshop or PhotoSketcher is also a great after and post-production part. It's going to really help you because it's definitely important to get that working together. Finally, in terms of working with teams, I think that schematic design sometimes is having one designer sort of drive the project. Maybe a principal, a project architect will be working with maybe intern who might drive some of the red line or communications. Revit is very well suited for that. And again, it's about having that end modeler understanding how to do things within Revit. It's going to help you do that well and then get that to those processes of presenting it and also getting that feedback so you can be refining the form and moving design project along. So schematic design is going to be a key element for the success of that Revit process, making it go fast. So if you follow some of these tips for how you organize project, how you start it, it's going to make that work so much more easily. Next, we'll go into the part of the project where we're thinking about the design development. This is where we're starting to bring in consultants for something like a residential project, as opposed to where maybe a commercial firm would start right in schematic design because, of course, of the size and scale. With design development is where a lot of residential architects are going to be starting to build a team a little bit. This is where Revit really going to start to shine because, again, all of the elements that you're using, the walls, the windows, the doors, even the furniture, they're all with a system. And so now we're starting to integrate some of those design details. So we're knowing how that building fits together, and Revit is very well suited to that, even for residential, because again, we're saying we know what type of material we're going to use for the house, as we're seeing, okay, this is going to work with it. We have already set those up in the project. We don't have to be constantly changing the wall size or something. The idea is we have one family that we can be adjusting as necessary that can fill that. And we'll be having details that are already cut within the model. So this is where we're starting to get their section cuts, getting elevations, getting different details in different areas. And Revit is just, you set those up. A lot of things that I do in the Revit is just a simple process called ballooning, where you could just be putting your detail tags, your sections in, already knowing, okay, this is where a unique condition is, and you just go through the model and create those. You don't have to overdo it. Like I I would say, in understanding what commercial does, where we have to really know everything. If we have some typical types in our Revit project, we could just go through a project and really locate those. And it's a very simple process. And one of the great things, again, is with Revit, you have templates. As you understand, you have a really powerful template that goes through each of the details, to go through each of the elevations already. And you have that set for a project. And that's going to help you immediately plug in, so you're not having to come up with that each time. And that's going to help you manage several different drawings. Your building elements are now going to be really organized, and it's essentially starting to systematize your project into more understanding, the standard details that you're working with. And it's going to help that conversation for the design, because you definitely be solving critical design issues with the design systems that are going to be going to solve those, and including going back and forth with the engineer. If the engineer uses Revit, then you can be bringing your structures directly, and you're seeing how everything's actually working. And of course, if they have issue, your coordination meeting with the engineer can help you directly look at that model. If not, if it's just CAD, you also can be finding those discrepancies or ways to maybe be more efficient. This is also where you can, of course, start to be looking at your design and value engineering. Not going out of context, you could say, hey, look, this is obviously an area where there's a challenge. Having that model, having a 3D model where you can be looking at everything at the same time, as opposed to maybe going with a CAD model, is going to be a really thing that sets Revit apart in this process. We will take this part of the process also as we're bringing things back between consultants, to have that template for what we're going to export to consultants as well. Because the idea is, unlike maybe in my AutoCAD days that we would send a project maybe in a couple CAD outlets, there are some things that were exported to engineers that we didn't need them to have every information. Well, typically you're just going to export your Revit model. However, you can package your model when you're exporting it. So, however, typically you just are sending one model as opposed to 20 different CAD files, and that's going to make it also very, very useful. I mean, if you're just PDFing a set for a quote, that's really useful. But if they have Revit, it's definitely going to help them learn a lot more. So this actually even benefits more custom residential designs as well, because you have modeled everything out, and so that can go straight to the engineer. So this is definitely where you're going to be getting that project making more sense for more of the design team. And so that's where we are going to be really shining, seeing the benefit of Revit, because that is a design that is developed, of course. Let's go into the next part of the project, where we're looking at CDs and project delivery. Project delivery, pretty much now that we're getting ready to have this thing built, CDs is, I think it's really right up there with the design development part for what Revit can offer. With this part, you're looking at all these details that you really can either have made before, or you're getting straight from the manufacturer and you're integrating those into your project. And so having your collection of those details, you could just drag and drop. It's very, very useful. And of course, you could just customize it on any scale you want. Of course, you could also directly be bringing details, right overlaying onto actual 3D sections of the model. And that's going to be a great thing that Revit just lets you do. And it's a very simple way of doing it. And it's just a way where you can be coordinating, checking, make sure things work. Because, CDs is not just where you're just getting what construction will be. You could be testing and finding out things that might need to update. So that's where CDs are really powerful, of just having that coordinated set throughout the model, where you can be going through each of those drawings. Your project team can be going back and forth between the project architect and the design team to refine all those details. And of course, following the guidelines for that project, looking at your value engineering, that everything is following the design intent and the project intent. This is also benefited as, of course, architects generally. We, of course, are doing our estimates throughout the project. This is where we can get a really defined estimate as well with BIM, though, of course, some architects will, of course, have their different methods. Of course, you bring in a lot of industry information to understand the cost of the project. However, there's a lot of tools within Revit to understand that. And so this is a great example of how a project is not dropped here. Because it's like maybe just a set of drawings to getting other information, but actually you actually having a full pretty much information about a project. It's going to be great for when you might say you would transition, as this is going into from bidding to construction to actually a project management model. I've even had it where we've actually even given a model to a school that they were going to be renovating. And pretty much they're able to use that model even for VR tours. So they're able to see it, they use it again. And that's another great Revit sort of pass on. Of course, again, you have your contracts. If you're going to give someone your Revit model, it's the same sort of understanding of how you transition there. Also, for things like your bid set, you have a very powerful control of revisions and phases. Again, like you have a Revit model, and the idea is you can have a central one during the CA, and you can sort of close out your one for the previous phase. And that's definitely going to help you. So like if you're bringing additional instructions from the architect, you're going to be keeping that there. Any sort of, things that you have authorized, you can place those in the model, and that drawing set it's an agency, like it's internally knowledgeable. If you can be tagging and having that in the set, you can have multiple phases within one drawing, and I feel that's an incredible part about working with Revit. You're also understanding that contractors will be using Revit, and going back and forth between them is going to be really critical. So like in a custom residential project, you're going through, you're taking photos, seeing what people are doing. Again, I think it might not be as common for maybe a contractor in custom residential to have too much Revit. However, again, it's that useful ability to see the project as it's going through, answer questions, and making sure that it's going in the right direction. So I think Revit, by you having that great control and being able to communicate that throughout the process, that you can start getting submittals and saying, okay, no, this is how things work. You can get it straight from the model. It's not in your current model that you're using with the construction administration, and that could be something that you're directly communicating to the contractor. So it's not that you have some old AutoCAD drawings that you're trying to go through and saying which one. The idea is by having that set for CA, you can have an official version that you're going back and forth with the contractor. That's going through all those phases, going from the schematic to design development to construction documents and CA, and seeing a Revit really match in a unique way versus some of the other solutions, of course, that we architects have been using. So what do you think about Revit now? Have you heard all that conversation about Revit being like this big, bulky project? Is it really as beneficial? I would say yes, because of course, like I've worked with architects even working on their own homes and using Revit, where they were just giving sketches and going back into the drawing engine and just getting those out and being able to get that to their contractors and building it, even for the smallest parts of the project. Revit is proving to be very fast, and it's just by using those constant and templates, those developed systems, that you're actually working with more than just Revit. But by that effort, you're actually seeing it actually work much greater than the effort that would be done in something like a CAD or simply a hand drawing. It's giving you that power of that system, and it's also just connecting, if you want to make something more detailed or less detailed, Revit adds, and it gives you a great framework for doing that. So what are your thoughts about Revit and residential? Do you have any more questions? Do you think it's something you would try out? Let me know. If you're watching this, you can leave that in the comments. Again, this is Brandon, and this is My show, Architecture Beyond, is for architects and designers showing about the places in between and around architecture that are opportunities. And today we've just talked about Revit and how it's great for residential. And I hope you have seen some great points. If you agree, if you disagree, you can always let me know. Look at the contact information, and I'll see you in the next episode.
If you're interested in learning more about the newest design software and techniques, visit our sponsor I Am The Studio at iamthestudio.com and sign up with our newsletter Design Insights Weekly.
In the next episode, we will learn about the exciting ups and downs of starting a 21st century architecture firm from scratch with young firm owner, entrepreneur, and community leader Joseph Cole. Be sure to check it out. This has been Brandon and the Architecture Beyond crew. Catch you in the next episode.